When the empire fell, it didn't vanish, it burned. In the ruins of a once golden kingdom, whispers of a lost heir and forbidden technology spark a desperate hunt for power. As soldiers, spies, and outlaws clash among the ashes, one question ignites them all. Will the next ruler rise from the blood of the fallen, or from the fire of rebellion? The sun hung low over the horizon as Marcus Valerius's carriage rumbled down the worn Via Sacra, the heart of Rome's ancient glory. The familiar sights, once symbols of imperial might, now bore the unmistakable scars of neglect and decay. Broken columns jutted from crumbled temples, their marble once gleaming, now dulled beneath layers of soot and dust. Vendors hawked their wares with a desperation that echoed through the narrow streets, while the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang out faintly, mingling with the murmurs of anxious citizens gathered in hushed clusters. Marcus's gaze was sharp, taking in every detail as the carriage slowed near the Forum. The air was thick with the scent of stale smoke and the faint tank of refuse left unattended in the alleys. Even the sky seemed weighed down by a grey pall, as if the city itself mourned its own decline. His heart tightened with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. This was not the Rome of his youth, the eternal city of marble and conquest, but a shadow of its former self. He stepped down with measured dignity, his tall frame cutting a commanding figure amid the bustle. His silvering dark hair caught the fading light, and his sharp eyes swept the surroundings with a mixture of resolve and quiet grief. Nearby, a group of children darted between broken market stalls, their laughter a fragile defiance against the encroaching gloom. A servant awaited him at the carriage, bowing respectfully before leading the way to the Valerius family estate. The ancestral home stood at the edge of the Palatine Hill, its once proud facade now softened by age and the weight of unspoken anxieties. Inside, the atrium echoed with the hushed footsteps of those who awaited his return. Livia was the first to greet him, her composed grace a stark contrast to the unrest that rippled beneath her sharp dark eyes. "Marcus," she said quietly, her voice steady yet tinged with urgency, "Rome has changed since you left. We must change with it, or be consumed." Their son, Gaius, stood nearby, youthful and restless, his intense gaze locked on his father with a mixture of hope and challenge. "Father," he began, "the world we knew is gone. We cannot cling to old ways while enemies gather at our gates." Lucilla, Marcus's younger sister, appeared at the doorway, her delicate features calm but resolute. "We must not lose our honor," she pleaded softly. "In these times, our traditions are all that remain to guide us." The family gathered around the heavy oak table in the shadowed atrium, voices rising amid the flickering candlelight. Livia urged pragmatism, warning of the dangers in blind loyalty. Gaius spoke passionately of new alliances and rebellion against the decaying order. Marcus listened, torn between the weight of his heritage and the pressing realities unfolding before him. Outside, the city continued its uneasy rhythm. The Forum, once a stage for imperial triumph, now hummed with whispered conspiracies and cautious alliances. Marcus knew the Senate awaited him, a chamber rife with factionalism and fragile loyalties. As he prepared to face the political storm, the question gnawed at him: how could one preserve a legacy when the very foundations of the empire crumbled beneath their feet? That night, alone in a candlelit corridor, Marcus found himself drawn to an ancient mosaic depicting Rome's founding. His fingers traced the worn tesserae as memories flooded back lessons learned in rhetoric, governance, and a solemn duty to serve the Republic. The mosaic's faded colors mirrored the twilight of the empire itself, yet within him stirred a reluctant hope, a determination to navigate the perilous path ahead. The city's decay was undeniable, but so too was the resilience of those who remained. Marcus knew the road forward would be fraught with peril, betrayal, and sacrifice, but he would meet it with the steadfastness that had defined his family for generations. For in Rome's ashes, new fires might yet be kindled if only they could survive the coming storm. As dawn approached, the first murmurs of the Senate's awakening echoed through the city's stone corridors. Marcus steeled himself for the battles, both political and personal, that awaited. The empire's twilight demanded a reckoning, and the Valerius family stood at its uncertain heart. The Senate chamber was a vast hall of polished marble and towering columns, where sunlight fought to pierce through the high, narrow windows and cast long shadows across the mosaic floor. Marcus Valerius entered with measured steps, the heavy weight of the city's decline pressing upon his broad shoulders. The air inside was thick with tension, the murmurs of senators weaving a tapestry of suspicion and rivalry. It was a far cry from the days when Rome's Senate had convened with unity and purpose. Now, it was a battleground where old loyalties eroded beneath the relentless advance of ambition. Marcus's sharp eyes scanned the assembly, noting the familiar faces twisted by doubt and the new ones brimming with ruthless intent. At the center, Cassius Drusus sat like a hawk waiting to strike. His scarred face betrayed nothing, but his cold, calculating eyes flickered with a dangerous light. Beside him, Senator Flavius whispered incessantly, their conspiracy palpable to any who dared to look closely. As the session commenced, the chamber erupted in fervent debate. Voices clashed. Accusations hung in the air like poisoned daggers. Cassius seized the moment, sowing discord by casting aspersions on the loyalty of the traditional senators. He spoke with a venomous eloquence, painting them as relics incapable of adapting to Rome's new realities. His words dripped with menace, and many younger senators nodded in uneasy agreement. Marcus stepped forward, his stature commanding silence. His voice, calm but resolute, cut through the cacophony. He spoke not only of the Senate's storied past, but of the necessity to uphold Rome's foundational values amid chaos. His eloquence stirred some hearts, reminding them of a shared heritage worth preserving. Yet, even as a few senators exchanged approving glances, Marcus could feel the fragile web of loyalty unraveling. Between speeches, Marcus caught sight of Lucilla's faint nod from the gallery, a small gesture of encouragement that grounded him. But the sight of Livia's composed yet watchful gaze reminded him of the stakes beyond politics. Family survival depended on his ability to navigate these treacherous waters. The debates grew more heated. Senator Flavius openly challenged Marcus, accusing him of clinging to obsolete ideals that endangered Rome's future. The chamber buzzed with whispers and side conversations, alliances shifting like shadows. Cassius, ever the puppeteer, smiled thinly as his plans took root. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing upon his conscience. He was a guardian of Rome's fading glory, yet the forces arrayed against him were relentless. As the session drew to a close, the Senate was no longer a place of governance, but an arena of survival, where every word could tilt the balance between honor and ruin. Outside the chamber, the sun dipped lower, casting the city in a golden haze that belied the darkness within. Marcus walked slowly, the echoes of the day's conflict ringing in his ears. He knew that the shadows within the Senate were only the beginning. The true test lay ahead, whether tradition could endure the ruthless tide of change. In the quiet of his chambers that evening, Marcus penned notes and speeches, seeking to rally his allies for the battles yet to come. The flickering candlelight danced upon his face, revealing lines of worry etched deep by sleepless nights and relentless struggle. Yet beneath the weariness, a spark of reluctant hope remained, a belief that even in Rome's twilight, the flame of loyalty and honor might yet burn bright. As darkness enveloped the city, Marcus's thoughts turned to his family. The fractures that loomed within their household mirrored those tearing through the empire. He resolved to hold fast, to be the steadfast rock amid the rising storm. But he could not ignore the creeping fear that the shadows of the Senate would soon engulf them all. The chapter closed on Marcus's somber reflection, the weight of his duty heavier than ever. The Senate's corridors whispered of betrayal, ambition, and survival. And in that uncertain twilight, Marcus Valerius stood at a crossroads, his every choice a step into the unknown. The Valerius family atrium was heavy with a silence that was anything but peaceful. Marcus Valerius sat at the head of the vast wooden table, its surface scarred by years of use, worn smooth in places where hands had rested during moments of counsel and debate. Around him, the family Livia, Gaius, and Lucilla gathered beneath the flickering light of oil lamps, whose smoke curled toward the vaulted ceiling like the uncertain fate of the empire itself. Marcus's eyes, sharp and contemplative, traced the lines on the scroll before him, maps of provinces now fraught with unrest and barbarians pressing at the borders. Yet his mind was elsewhere, caught between the ideals he had sworn to uphold and the grim realities that encroached relentlessly upon Rome. Livia Valeria, seated beside him, regarded Marcus with a calm that masked the steel beneath. Her dark eyes reflected the flickering flames as she spoke, her voice low but firm. "Marcus, we can no longer afford the luxury of idealism. The Senate fractures, the barbarians gather strength, and our enemies plot in shadows. We must adapt, or we will perish." Marcus met her gaze, the weight of her words settling like a leaden cloak around his shoulders. "Adaptation must not mean surrender to chaos, Livia. There is honor in perseverance. The legacy of Rome is not so easily cast aside." Gaius, the youthful son whose restless energy had long been a source of both hope and concern, could no longer contain his impatience. Rising abruptly, he strode to the open window, the cool night air stirring his dark hair as he looked out upon the city he both loved and despised. "Legacy," he demanded, voice ringing with youthful fervor. "The legacy you cherish is dying. The Senate is corrupt, the people fearful, and the gods silent. We must seize the future, even if it means breaking with the past." His words hung in the air, a challenge and a provocation that stirred unease among those gathered. Lucilla, the youngest and most gentle of the family, rose quietly to stand beside her brother. Her delicate features softened by candlelight, she spoke with a voice that was both tender and resolute. "We must not lose ourselves in desperation. Mercy and honor must guide us, even now. The gods may seem distant, but their silence is a test of our faith and our will." The room fell silent as each member grappled with the weight of their convictions. Marcus's heart ached with the knowledge that the bonds holding them together were fraying, torn by conflicting visions of what survival might demand. "Gaius," Marcus said at last, voice steady though heavy with sorrow, "your zeal is admirable, but recklessness will bring ruin. The empire's fall is not a call to abandon all we hold dear, but a summons to preserve what we can, with honor intact." Gaius's eyes flashed with defiance. "Honor will not fill empty granaries or protect our homes from the barbarians. If we do not act, we are doomed." Livia leaned forward, her fingers interlacing over the table. "Then we must find a middle path. Alliances with new powers, concessions that preserve our family, even if it means sacrifices we would rather not make. Lucilla's gaze fell to the floor, her voice barely above a whisper. But at what cost? Are we to become the very shadows we fear, losing ourselves in the process? The evening stretched on, voices rising and falling, the clash of ideals echoing in the ancient walls. Outside, the city of Rome breathed unevenly, its streets whispering of decay and unrest, while within the Valerius home, the family faced a crossroads that would determine their fate. Marcus knew that the decisions made tonight would ripple far beyond their household. The empire was dying, and with it, the world they had known. Yet, in the midst of despair, a reluctant hope lingered that, perhaps, through sacrifice and adaptation, some fragment of Rome's greatness might endure. As the lamps guttered low and the night deepened, Marcus's thoughts drifted to the uncertain dawn. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, but he resolved to walk it with steadfast heart, even if it meant walking alone. The family's voices faded into the night, leaving behind a silence pregnant with both fear and possibility. The crossroads had been reached. Now the journey must begin. Marcus Valerius had always believed that Rome, for all its cracks and crumbling pillars, held onto a core of unyielding tradition. Yet, as he stepped back into the marble halls of the Senate, the air was thick with whispers not of loyalty, but of subterfuge. The city's decay was no longer just in the crumbling aqueducts or the neglected temples. It seeped into the very veins of its governing body. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, Marcus found himself lingering near the Senate's outer chambers, where hushed voices slipped through the heavy drapes. His sharp ears caught fragments names of barbarian chieftains, secret trysts, and promises made under the cloak of night. Cassius Drusus's name surfaced repeatedly, entwined with the mention of these foreign powers. The senator's usual cold demeanor was now shadowed by a dangerous alliance, one that threatened to unravel the fragile balance of power in Rome. Back at the ancestral home, the Valerius villa was a sanctuary and a battlefield in equal measure. Livia Valeria, ever the pragmatist, moved with quiet purpose through the dimly lit corridors. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned parchments and letters spread across a heavy oak table. She dialed numbers, sent discreet messages through trusted servants, and engaged in subtle manipulations of Senate factions. Her voice was calm, but beneath it lay the steel of desperation to protect her husband and their family's legacy. Each calculated move was a thread in a web she wove to catch the ever-tightening noose of Cassius's ambitions. Meanwhile, Gaius Valerius could not conceal his growing restlessness. The weight of his father's ideals felt like chains binding him to a dying world. Under the twilight sky, in the shadowed alleys near the Forum, he met with Julia, his childhood confidant and voice of encouragement. Her merchant family background gave her a perspective different from the senatorial elite, and together they dreamed aloud of a future unfettered by ancient Rome's fading grandeur. Gaius's words were bold, laced with urgency and impatience, as he spoke of alliances with the barbarians, not as enemies, but as potential partners in survival. His rebellion was not mere youthful defiance. It was a calculated gamble to forge a new path amid the ashes. In the shadowed alcoves of political power, Cassius Drusus convened with his loyal senators and emissaries. His scarred face was a mask of ruthless ambition, cold eyes glinting with satisfaction. He outlined plans to leverage his barbarian alliances to purge traditionalist senators and seize control of the Senate. Every word dripped with calculated menace, a vision of Rome reshaped under his iron will. To him, the old empire was a relic to be dismantled and rebuilt stronger, no matter the cost. The discoveries Marcus made pressed heavily on his conscience. The betrayal was not just political, but deeply personal. He wrestled with the knowledge that his son's secret negotiations could be both a salvation and a curse for their family. The villa, once a place of refuge, now echoed with tension as each member grappled with their choices. Livia's covert manipulations, Gaius's rebellious alliances, and Marcus's own struggle to hold on to fading ideals created a tempest that threatened to consume them all. As night deepened, Marcus stood on the balcony overlooking the forum, the distant fires of unrest flickering like dying stars. The whispers of betrayal were no longer just rumors, but clear and present dangers. His voice, usually measured and thoughtful, was filled with quiet resolve as he vowed to navigate the treacherous tides ahead. Yet beneath that resolve lay an uneasy question. How much of their heritage must they sacrifice to survive? The chapter closed on a note of simmering tension, with the Valerius family poised on the edge of irrevocable change. The shadows lengthened, and the whispers grew louder, promising that the coming days would test their loyalties, their courage, and their very souls. The sun dipped low over the Roman horizon, casting a muted orange glow across the city's ancient stones. Marcus Valerius stood upon the balcony of his ancestral home, his sharp eyes tracing the jagged silhouette of the crumbling walls that had long stood as Rome's bulwark against the world beyond. As twilight deepened, a distant haunting horn echoed from the northern frontier, a grim reminder that the barbarians were stirring once more. The reports had come in steadily, each carrying darker tidings than the last. Increased raids, more frequent skirmishes, and a growing sense of boldness among the tribes that once skulked in the wilderness. Praetor Maximus, the empire's seasoned military commander, had returned from the front with grave news. The once formidable border defenses were stretched thin, and the legions, weakened by years of internal strife and neglect, struggled to maintain their grip. Marcus turned from the balcony as the heavy footsteps of Tiberius approached. The trusted officer's face, weathered from countless campaigns, bore the same stern expression that Marcus had come to recognize as a mirror to his own unease. The latest dispatch, Tiberius began, handing over a sealed scroll, reports a raid near the province of Raetia. The barbarians struck swiftly, pillaging farms and villages before retreating. The legions were slow to respond. Marcus broke the seal, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the parchment. Raetia, it seems the cracks in our defenses deepen by the day. Tiberius nodded grimly. Maximus fears this is but the beginning. The tribes are uniting under stronger leaders, emboldened by Rome's distractions here in the Senate. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon Marcus. As a senator and former provincial governor, he knew all too well the political tensions that sapped Rome's strength. Yet, the military realities were impossible to ignore. Later that evening, Praetor Maximus arrived at the Valerius estate. His presence was commanding, his armor battered but meticulously maintained, a testament to the relentless campaigns he had endured. Marcus, Maximus greeted, his voice low but urgent. The barbarians grow bolder. Our forces are stretched thin, and the Senate's infighting hampers decisive action. Marcus listened intently as Maximus detailed the precarious situation along the northern borders. We face not merely raids, but an emerging threat that could unravel what remains of the empire's hold. In the dim light of the atrium, the Valerius family convened. Livia, ever pragmatic, voiced her concerns plainly. Our political enemies exploit this chaos. We must consider alliances beyond the Senate's walls if we are to survive. Lucilla, her delicate features shadowed by worry, countered softly, "And what of Rome's honor? Our gods? Are we to forsake all that defines us? The room fell into tense silence. The clash between tradition and survival hung palpable in the air. Marcus met his sister's gaze. The empire's foundations crumble. Lucilla, we stand at a crossroads. As night deepened, the distant sounds of the city hushed whispers in the marble halls. The faint clatter of soldiers preparing for uncertain days reminded them all that Rome's twilight was no longer a distant threat, but an encroaching reality. Throughout the night, Marcus wrestled with the balance between political ideals and the harsh demands of military necessity. The barbarians' encroachments were not merely a test of arms, but a challenge to the very soul of Rome. Would steadfast loyalty to tradition lead to ruin? Or would pragmatic adaptation betray the legacy they sought to preserve? The answers remained elusive as the first light of dawn crept over the city, illuminating a Rome caught between decay and the desperate hope for survival. The moon hung low over the dense canopy of the forest, its pale silver light barely penetrating the thick foliage. Beneath the rustling leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl, a small group gathered in the shadowed clearing, their faces intermittently illuminated by the flickering flames of a hastily built fire. Gaius Valerius sat rigidly among them, his youthful figure tense, eyes sharp and restless. Across from him, the barbarian chieftains exchanged cautious glances, their scarred faces hardened by years of conflict and survival. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, mingling with the faint bitterness of smoke. "We offer you strength," one of the chieftains said in halting Latin, his voice rough and deliberate. "Together we can shift the tide. The old Rome weakens. Your family, your legacy, preserve it by embracing the new order." Gaius met the gaze steadily, though his heart pounded with a cocktail of fear and determination. "I do not seek Rome's ruin," he replied, voice low but firm, "only to ensure our survival when the Senate turns its back on the truth." A murmur rippled through the group. Julia, standing just behind Gaius, whispered encouragement, her eyes alight with conviction. "This is our chance," she said. "You are the bridge between two worlds." Meanwhile, far from the forest's quiet conspiracies, Marcus Valerius sat alone in the dim study of the family estate. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the walls lined with heavy tomes and scrolls. In his hands, he held intercepted letters-coded messages whose meaning gnawed at his heart. The words hinted at secret meetings, alliances forged in darkness, alliances that threatened everything he had sworn to protect. His jaw tightened as he reread a passage. "Guy," he murmured, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. The senator's mind waged a silent battle, his unyielding loyalty to Rome and his family's honor clashing with the painful possibility of his son's betrayal. That evening, the Valerius family convened in the ancestral dining hall. The air was heavy with unspoken tensions, the flickering torches casting a restless dance of light and shadow across the marble floor. Gaius sat opposite his father, his youthful face alight with quiet defiance, while Livia watched silently, her sharp eyes weighing every word, every glance. "Father," Gaius began, voice steady though edged with frustration, "we cannot cling to a dying empire and expect to survive. The barbarians grow stronger. The Senate is paralyzed. We must adapt or perish." Marcus met his son's gaze, the weight of years and expectation pressing down on his broad shoulders. "Adaptation must not come at the cost of our honor, Gaius. Rome's legacy is not so easily discarded." Lucilla, their sister and sister-in-law respectively, intervened gently. "Perhaps there is a path that honors both survival and tradition, but we must tread carefully lest we lose ourselves in the shadows." The conversation fractured into uneasy silence. Each member wrestled with their own fears and hopes, the family's unity trembling on the edge of irrevocable change. Days later, in the cool dawn air of the estate's courtyard, Tiberius approached Marcus. The veteran soldier's eyes were grave beneath his weathered brow, the morning chill sharpening his features. "Senator Tiberius," began, "the barbarians grow restless, emboldened by unknown alliances. I fear Gaius's actions may hasten the storm we seek to avoid." Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight of leadership settling heavily upon him. "And yet, we face a choice: guard our fading traditions, or embrace uncertain alliances. I fear the fracture has already begun." The city beyond the estate's walls stirred awake, its streets echoing with the distant clangor of arms and the whispered promises of change. Marcus's thoughts swirled, torn between the steadfast past and the uncertain future his son was forging in the shadows. The chapter closes as Marcus stands at a balcony overlooking the cityscape, the first light of dawn casting a somber glow. His resolve steels even as doubt gnaws, the question lingering: how far can loyalty bend before it breaks? The dense forest, the flicker of firelight on worn faces, and the clash of ideals between father and son weave a tapestry of tension and hope. Marcus's internal struggle mirrors the empire's decline, and Gaius's bold gambit threatens to redefine their legacy. The fractured loyalty at the heart of the Valerius family sets the stage for decisions that will shape not only their fate, but that of Rome itself. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the marble floor of the Valerius atrium, where Livia Valeria sat surrounded by a small circle of trusted allies. The air was thick with the scent of oil lamps and the faint musk of old stone. Her sharp dark eyes, usually so composed and austere, glimmered with a fierce, calculating light as she spoke in hushed tones. "We cannot afford to wait for fate to decide Marcus's future," she said quietly, fingers resting lightly on a folded scroll that contained lists of senators and their known allegiances. "Cassius grows bolder each day, but there are fractures in his coalition. We will exploit them." Her voice was steady, though beneath it lay the unmistakable undercurrent of ruthlessness. Around her, the noble women and senators' wives nodded in agreement, their faces taut with anxiety and resolve. The Valerius family's survival depended on these subtle, often unseen maneuvers, the delicate art of persuasion and intimidation practiced behind closed doors. Livia had long understood that the Senate was not a place for open confrontation, but a theatre of shadows, where whispers held more power than swords. Across the city, Marcus Valerius paced the length of his study in the family villa, the weight of his silvering hair and the sharp lines of his face etched by exhaustion. Though he had returned to Rome with hope and determination, the city's decay pressed on him like a physical burden. He had witnessed the Senate's growing factionalism firsthand, and the ruthless ambition of Cassius Drusus was a threat unlike any before. Yet tonight, as Livia's message arrived, a brief note assuring him that her interventions had delayed Cassius's immediate plans, a flicker of reluctant hope stirred in his chest. Seated nearby was Lucilla, his younger sister, her delicate features drawn with concern. She had listened to Livia's report with quiet apprehension, her calm demeanor belying the storm of emotion beneath. Later, in the family's garden, soft twilight bathed the marble statues and carefully tended herbs in a muted glow. Lucilla confronted Livia, her voice trembling with sorrow and accusation. "Must we sacrifice all our principles to survive?" she asked, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Where is the honor in alliances forged through deceit and manipulation?" Livia's expression hardened, the faintest shadow crossing her austere beauty. "Honor is a luxury Rome can no longer afford," she replied gently but firmly. "If we do not adapt, we perish. I do this for Marcus, for our family." The rift between them was palpable, a fracture that mirrored the very empire they sought to save. The garden, once a place of solace, now seemed a battleground of ideals and survival. Meanwhile, in the Senate chambers, the grand hall echoed with whispers and furtive glances. Senators gathered in small clusters, their voices low, the air thick with suspicion and ambition. From the shadows, Cassius Drusus observed with cold eyes that bore the scars of his brutal past. A cruel smile curved his lips as he sensed the fragile balance was tipping, that the Valerius family's newfound shield was but a temporary reprieve. The game was far from over. Yet beneath the political machinations, the Valerius household grappled with its own internal conflicts. Marcus found himself caught between the steadfast loyalty to Rome's tradition and the pragmatic ruthlessness his wife embodied. Lucilla's moral anguish echoed the dying virtues of old Rome, while Livia's strategic manipulations represented the harsh necessities of a crumbling world. The price of pragmatism was exacting, and each choice carved deeper into the family's soul. As night deepened over Rome, the flickering candlelight in the Valerius villa seemed to burn a little lower, shadows lengthening across the walls like the empire's own decay. The family's survival depended on delicate balances between hope and fear, loyalty and betrayal, honor and survival. And as the city held its breath, the question remained: how far would they go before their legacy was lost in the ashes of empire? The chapter closes as Livia returns to her chamber, her expression unreadable, the weight of her decisions pressing heavily upon her. Outside, the distant sounds of Rome's restless night, the murmur of voices, the clang of armor, the faint howl of wind through broken streets, underscore the tense uncertainty that holds the city in its grip. The fragile peace, won through pragmatism, is but a pause before the storm, and all await the next move in this deadly game. The flickering light of the oil lamps cast long shadows across the walls of the Valerius family shrine. The once vibrant frescoes, now dulled by age and neglect, their colors faded to ghostly whispers of the past. Lucilla stood before them, her fingers trembling as they traced the outlines of Jupiter's regal figure. His gaze, once commanding, now lost 2 times in different hand. The scent of extinguished incense hung heavy in the air, mingling with the damp chill of the marble floor beneath her sandal-clad feet. Her breath caught in her throat as she knelt before the altar, lips moving in silent supplication. "Divine ancestors," she whispered, "where have you gone? Have you abandoned us in this hour of darkness?" The silence answered her with icy finality. No rustle of robes, no flicker of light, no divine voice to comfort or chastise. Only the cold stone and the fading echoes of an empire's prayers. Lucilla's heart ached with a loneliness deeper than the physical solitude of the shrine. Rome, once the favored daughter of the gods, now seemed forsaken. The omens, the portent omens, read by priests whose voices wavered with uncertainty, spoke of wrath and withdrawal, of gods turning their faces away as the empire crumbled beneath its own weight. Outside, the city's restless noises crept faintly through the villa's thick walls. The distant clang of iron on stone, the murmur of voices rising in suspicion and fear, the occasional sharp cry of a sentinel warning against unknown threats. The world beyond was unraveling, and in the quiet sanctuary of her faith, Lucilla felt it most keenly. Later, in the villa's courtyard, Marcus Valerius and Livia Valeria met beneath a sky thick with heavy clouds that threatened rain but withheld it. as though even the heavens hesitated to weep for Rome. Marcus's tall frame was silhouetted against the pale stone, his silvering hair catching the dim light as he spoke with measured calm. "The god's silence is not abandonment," he said, voice low but resolute. "Rome endures because of men's will, not divine favor. We must hold to our duty regardless." His eyes, sharp and searching, met Livia's steady gaze. Livia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Duty will not protect us from the barbarians at the gates, Marcus. Nor will prayers fill empty coffers or silence the knives in the Senate. The gods may be silent because they see the truth we refuse to face. Survival demands pragmatism, not piety." Their words hung between them, a fragile bridge over widening chasms of belief and despair. Marcus's stoicism clashed with Livia's cynicism, a reflection of the larger turmoil tearing at Rome's very soul. That evening, as twilight bled into night, Lucilla found herself drawn to the ruins of an ancient temple beyond the city's edge. The crumbling columns, worn by centuries of wind and neglect, stood like silent sentinels in the fading light. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of wild herbs and earth. She knelt among the broken stones, hands folded, eyes closed. "Show me a sign," she begged the emptiness, voice trembling with a mixture of hope and despair. The wind stirred, whispering through the ruins, but brought no answer. The gods remained distant, their presence a fading memory etched in stone and shadow. Returning home, Lucilla joined the family for dinner, the heavy air thick with unspoken fears. She offered a prayer for guidance and Mercy a plea for strength to face the coming storms. Livia's eyes narrowed, skepticism gleaming beneath her composed exterior. Marcus said nothing, his silence a fortress against the tide of uncertainty. The clash of faith and pragmatism played out subtly in glances and half-spoken words. Lucilla's earnestness met Livia's guarded dismissal, and Marcus balanced between them, torn between loyalty to tradition and the harsh realities they faced. As the meal ended, Lucilla's voice broke the uneasy quiet. "If the gods have truly turned away, what hope remains for us?" Livia's reply was soft but firm. "Hope is not found in ancient rites or faded frescoes. It is forged in the choices we make now." Marcus raised his glass, eyes steady in the flickering lamplight. "Then let us choose wisely, for Rome's fate and ours rests in our hands." Outside, the night deepened, and the city's shadows stretched long and uncertain. The echoes of the gods had grown faint, but the struggle for the empire's soul was far from over. In the silence that followed, each member of the Valerius family wrestled with their own fears, hopes, and loyalties, caught between a fading past and an uncertain future. The night whispered promises of change, and with it, the fragile hope that even in decay, resilience might yet endure. The Senate chamber was thick with a charged silence, the kind that precedes a storm. Flickering torchlight cast long shadows on the marble pillars, lending the vast hall a spectral quality. Senators gathered, their faces a mixture of suspicion, fear, and hidden calculation. Cassius Drusus stood at the center, his scarred visage illuminated with a cold, ruthless light. His voice, low but commanding, cut through the murmurs like a drawn blade. "Fellow senators," Cassius began, "the time has come to cleanse the Senate of those who would see Rome fall by clinging to outdated ideals. The empire demands strength and new blood. Tradition cannot be a chain that binds us to decay." A murmur of assent rose from a contingent of younger senators and those aligned with Cassius's vision. Yet from the opposite side of the chamber, a ripple of unease spread. Marcus Valerius stood among the traditionalists, his tall frame rigid, silvering dark hair catching the torchlight. His sharp eyes scanned the room, noting the shifting allegiances. The names Cassius read aloud were a death knell for many. Senators whose loyalty to Rome's old ways marked them for political exile or worse. Marcus's voice, when he spoke, was steady but carried the weight of desperation. Rome is not a mere tool for power, nor a stage for ambition unchecked. It is a civilization built on honor, duty, and the wisdom of our ancestors. To cast aside these pillars is to invite ruin. I urge you all to consider the cost of this recklessness. His words were met with silence, then a few scattered nods, but the momentum Cassius had built was formidable. The purge was swift and merciless. Trusted allies of Marcus were arrested under charges of treason and conspiracy, their fates sealed before the Senate's eyes. Marcus himself narrowly escaped capture, aided by a network of loyalists and the discreet intervention of his wife. Livia, ever the strategist, moved through the corridors with quiet purpose. Her sharp dark eyes missed nothing, and her austere beauty belied a fierce resolve. When a messenger approached with news of the arrests, she intercepted him with a calm yet commanding tone. Ensure the family is warned. No word of this must reach the barbarians or our enemies outside these walls. The weight of the purge pressed heavily on the Valerius household. Lucilla, Marcus's delicate and gentle-featured sister, found no solace in their ancestral home. Instead, she sought refuge in the ruins of a forgotten temple, her palms pressed against cold stone as she whispered prayers for mercy. Tears brimmed in her eyes as the spiritual decay mirrored the political collapse she witnessed. Inside the Senate, Cassius's grip tightened. His loyal senators moved with newfound boldness, reshaping alliances and silencing dissent. The chamber that once echoed with reason and debate now buzzed with fear and opportunism. Marcus, forced into the shadows, contemplated his next moves. His rigid adherence to tradition had brought him to the brink of ruin, yet his resolve to preserve Rome's legacy remained unbroken. The purge was not merely a political maneuver. It was a declaration that the old Rome was dying, and a new, harsher order was rising from its ashes. Marcus's survival was uncertain, his allies few, and the path ahead fraught with peril. Yet, in the depths of betrayal and loss, a reluctant hope flickered, a hope that resilience and honor might yet endure amid the empire's turmoil. As the torches dimmed and the chamber emptied, the echoes of the purge lingered like a ghost. The Senate was no longer a place of unity, but a battlefield where power was won through ruthlessness. Marcus's journey had taken a perilous turn. The question was no longer whether he could save Rome, but whether Rome could survive him. The night outside was heavy with the scent of smoke and decay. Somewhere in the distance, the clash of armor and the distant cries of barbarians reminded all that the empire's twilight was far from over. Marcus Valerius, once a proud guardian of Rome's traditions, now faced the harsh reality that survival might demand sacrifice beyond his imagining. And yet, as dawn approached, casting a pale light over the broken city, a fragile resolve hardened within him. The Senate in turmoil was but a symptom of a greater crisis. The Valerius family, fractured and threatened, must navigate this tempest or be swept away forever. The ashes of empire lay scattered, but from them, perhaps, a new dawn could rise. The Valerius household was a battleground of ideals and desperation as evening fell over Rome's weary skyline. The marble pillars of their ancestral home, once symbols of unyielding strength, now seemed to bear the weight of a world in decline, their surfaces cracked and dulled by time and neglect. In the great atrium, where the family had long gathered to discuss matters of state and kin, voices rose in heated discord. Marcus Valerius, tall and dignified despite the weariness etched into his sharp eyes and silvering hair, stood facing his son Gaius. The younger man's youthful energy was a stark contrast to his father's measured solemnity. His gaze burned with restless intensity, his athletic frame taut with the urgency of his convictions. "Father," Gaius began, voice firm yet edged with frustration, "we cannot cling to the past while Rome burns around us. The old ways have failed. If we do not act boldly, our family and all we have stood for will be lost to the ashes." Marcus's reply was calm but resolute. "And what would you have us do, son? Betray the very principles that built this empire? Surrender to chaos and treachery? There is honor in endurance as well as in action." The tension between them was a mirror of the empire's own fractures between tradition and change, loyalty and survival. Nearby, Livia Valeria observed the exchange with a composed but guarded expression. Her sharp dark eyes, framed by an austere beauty, betrayed the storm of thoughts beneath her calm exterior. She had long understood that survival in Rome's treacherous political climate demanded more than idealism, required cunning and pragmatism. Later that evening, Livia withdrew to the family's secluded garden, a rare sanctuary where the fading light of dusk softened the harshness of the world. The air was heavy with the scent of wilting roses and damp earth, mingling with the distant clang of metal and muted voices from the city beyond the garden walls. She sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun dipped behind the crumbling skyline of Rome. In her mind, she rehearsed the delicate maneuvers needed to navigate the shifting allegiances within the Senate and among the rising barbarian powers. Every decision was a gamble, every alliance fraught with peril. Yet, beneath her calm exterior lay a fierce determination to shield her family from the encroaching storm, even if it meant embracing the very ruthlessness she once despised. Within the family library, a sanctuary lined with scrolls and faded frescoes, Lucilla Valeria's gentle voice broke the heavy silence. The younger sister of Marcus, delicate in frame and demeanor, clasped her hands tightly as she spoke, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Marcus," she implored softly, "we cannot lose ourselves to bitterness and revenge. The gods have not abandoned us entirely. There is still a path of mercy and honor even now. Our family's dignity depends on it." Marcus met her gaze, the conflict within him palpable. "Lucilla," he replied, his voice tinged with sorrow, "I yearned for that path. But the world we knew is fading, and I fear we must walk through darkness to find any light." As these private struggles unfolded, Gaius convened a secret meeting in a shadowed chamber beneath the city. The flicker of candlelight cast long, uncertain shadows over the faces of trusted allies gathered around a heavy wooden table. Gaius's voice was low but fervent as he outlined a bold plan to secure their family's future through alliances with the very forces Rome had long scorned. "Our enemies grow stronger," he warned, "and the old guard weakens. We must embrace change, form new bonds beyond the Senate's walls, or be swept aside by fate." The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with the scent of beeswax and the faint smoke of incense. Each man and woman weighed the risks, the promise of survival against the peril of betrayal. Back in the Valerius household, the fractures within the family deepened. Livia's attempts to mediate between Marcus's hope for reconciliation and Gaius's radicalism were fraught with difficulty. She understood that the bonds holding them together were tested not only by external enemies, but by the divergent visions of survival they each clung to. In the quiet moments before dawn, Marcus stood alone on the balcony overlooking the city. The cold night air whispered of an empire's twilight, and the distant sounds of restless streets echoed the turmoil in his heart. He pondered the cost of loyalty and the price of adaptation, aware that the choices made in the coming days would define not only his family's fate, but the legacy of Rome itself. The chapter closes on the uneasy silence of a city and a family on the brink, the fragile hope of survival shadowed by the ever-present spectre of loss and betrayal. The question lingers in the air. Can the Valerius family reconcile their fractured bonds before the ashes of their world are finally scattered to the winds? The first pale light of dawn crept over the broken skyline of Rome, casting long shadows across the cracked stones and crumbling edifices of the once glorious city. From the parapets of the ancient walls, Marcus Valerius looked out over a Rome transformed by neglect and fear. The Tiber River, usually calm and steady, now carried the distant rumble of marching feet, a sound that stirred a mix of dread and resolve in his chest. Across the foggy expanse beyond the city gates, dark shapes moved steadily, barbarian warriors gathering under the stern command of Praetor Maximus, a grim reminder that Rome's enemies were no longer distant threats, but imminent invaders. Beside Marcus stood Tiberius, his trusted military officer and lifelong friend. The veteran's weathered face was drawn tight with concern, his eyes scanning the horizon as if willing the approaching menace to halt. The cold morning air bit through their togas, but neither man stirred from their vigil. The city's fate seemed to hang on this fragile moment, balanced between the strength of ancient walls and the will of those prepared to defend them. "They come with the weight of the world behind them," Tiberius said quietly, breaking the silence. "Their numbers grow each day. Our legions are but shadows of what they once were." Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant banners fluttering in the breeze. "Yet we must stand. For Rome, for our family, for the ideals we cannot let die." The two men descended into the war chamber nestled beneath the Senate House, where flickering torches cast tall, dancing shadows against the stone walls. Maps sprawled across heavy wooden tables depicted the city's defenses, crumbling gates, thinly stretched patrols, and the precarious positioning of loyal legions. The air was thick with the scent of burning oil and the quiet hum of whispered strategies. Tiberius traced a finger along the lines, marking the barbarian approach routes. "If we hold the northern gate, we might delay their advance, but the eastern wall is vulnerable. We lack men and supplies." Marcus leaned over the map, his voice low but resolute. "Then we must call upon every loyal senator, every citizen willing to bear arms. This is no longer a battle of swords alone, but of survival." Outside, the city stirred with uneasy anticipation. Word of Praetor Maximus's march had reached even the farthest corners, and the people whispered of war in hushed tones. Through an open window, Marcus caught sight of Livia standing apart from the gathering crowds. Her face composed, yet etched with worry. Her sharp eyes met his briefly, a silent communication passing between them, a shared understanding of the sacrifices to come. Meanwhile, Praetor Maximus moved among his troops with the precision of a seasoned commander. His grizzled features betrayed no emotion beyond a cold determination. The clang of armor and the sharp commands he issued echoed across the camp, a stark contrast to the fragile calm within Rome's walls. His gaze swept over the city's silhouette, a silent vow burning in his eyes. This conquest would be swift and absolute. Back within the city, Marcus and Tiberius faced the daunting task of rallying a fractured populace and a depleted military. The political fractures within the Senate mirrored the physical cracks in the city's defenses. And Marcus knew that the looming siege would test more than just their strength with swords. "We face enemies without and within," Marcus murmured, folding the map with deliberate care. "The Senate's divisions weaken us. We must unify or perish." Tiberius placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Then we fight not just for Rome, but for what it once stood for, and for those who still believe." As the sun climbed higher, casting a harsh light on the decaying grandeur of Rome, the gathering storm of war approached inexorably. The choices made in the coming days would shape the legacy of the Valerius family and the fate of an empire teetering on the edge of oblivion. Marcus's thoughts drifted to his son Gaius and the dangerous paths he now walked. The family's survival might depend on uneasy alliances and hard compromises, but for now, the immediate threat was clear and pressing. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the tide of fear and uncertainty. "Let them come," he said softly. "Rome will endure in whatever form it must." The clang of a distant bell signaled the city's call to arms. The gathering storm was no longer a distant threat. It was upon them, and amid the shadows of crumbling pillars and fading glory, the defenders of Rome prepared for the battle that would decide their future. The walls that had stood for centuries now bore witness to the fragile hope and grim determination of a people caught between the past and an uncertain dawn. In the heart of the city, Marcus Valerius gazed out once more, knowing the fight for Rome's soul was only just beginning. Night fell, but the fires of resistance burned bright. The coming days promised blood and sacrifice, and as the first stars pierced the darkened sky, Marcus resolved to face the gathering storm with every ounce of strength he possessed. The fate of Rome and the Valerius family hung in the balance. The night wrapped Rome's outskirts in a shroud of uneasy silence, broken only by the distant howls of restless wolves and the crackling of a fire that sputtered against the damp air. Gaius Valerius crouched low by the flickering flames, his intense eyes reflecting the dancing light as he weighed each word with care. Beside him, Julia's gaze was sharp, alert to every sound, every shadow that might betray their presence. The barbarian chieftains sat opposite, rough-hewn figures silhouetted against the darkness, their faces marked by scars and hardened by years of battle. Their eyes, sharp and assessing, flicked between Gaius and Julia, wary of the Roman youth who dared to parley in their midst. "We seek not war," Gaius began, his voice steady but low, "but survival. The empire crumbles, and with it, the old ways. Help us forge a new path for our families, for our futures." The eldest chieftain, a towering figure with a mane of tangled grey hair, nodded slowly. "Words are wind, Roman. Show us your honor." Julia stepped forward, her confidence a stark contrast to the grim faces around her. "We offer more than words. Alliance, mutual protection, trade." A flicker of something like interest sparked in the chieftain's eyes, but the tension in the air remained palpable. These were men who had known betrayal and bloodshed. Trust was a luxury in short supply. Meanwhile, back within Rome's tangled web of stone and shadow, the city itself seemed to pulse with a growing unease. In narrow alleys and dimly lit taverns, spies and informants moved like ghosts, exchanging secret messages with hurried urgency. The air was thick with suspicion, every whispered rumor a potential dagger aimed at the Valerius family. Word of Gaius's covert meetings had begun to seep through the cracks, and with it, the threat that their fragile plans might unravel. In one such shadowed chamber, Julia confronted Gaius, her eyes flashing with a mix of concern and determination. "You cannot afford mistakes, Gaius. Every secret meeting, every whispered word, there are ears everywhere." Gaius met her gaze, his restless energy tempered by the weight of responsibility. I know the risks, but if we cling only to the past, our family will be lost. We must adapt, even if it means crossing lines once sacred. Their conversation was cut short by the sudden arrival of a messenger, breathless and wide-eyed, bearing news of increased patrols and tighter surveillance. The walls seemed to close in, the city's decay mirrored in the crumbling trust around them. As dawn broke, Gaius climbed a rocky hill overlooking the barbarian encampment. The first light painted the tents and fires in hues of gold and shadow. He allowed himself a moment of hope, a fragile, flickering ember amid the darkness encroaching on all sides. Yet beneath that hope lay the gnawing uncertainty of what these alliances might cost. Would they be the salvation his family desperately needed, or the spark that ignited their ruin? As Rome's twilight deepened, Gaius stood poised between loyalty and survival, the future hanging in a precarious balance. The night's whispers and the dawn's light together told a story of desperation and daring. In the shadows, secrets grew like wild vines, threatening to choke or to shelter. And in the heart of it all, the Valerius family's fate teetered on the knife edge of change. The city awoke slowly, unaware that the fragile threads holding its future were being woven in darkness, threads spun by a son who dared to dream beyond the empire's fading glory. The question lingered, heavy and unresolved. Could such secrets in the shadows bring about rebirth, or only deepen the decay? The answers, like the city itself, remained shrouded in mystery and danger, waiting for the dawn to reveal their true shape. The heavy wooden doors of the Valerius ancestral home creaked softly as Marcus led the way into the dimly lit atrium. The flickering glow of oil lamps cast long shadows across the marble floors, their light dancing uneasily on the worn tapestries that hung from the high walls. The house, once vibrant with the laughter and footsteps of generations, now felt subdued, as if it too mourned the fading grandeur of Rome itself. Lucilla stood near the hearth, her delicate frame wrapped in a simple but elegant stola, the pale fabric catching what little light there was. Her gentle features were drawn with a quiet tension, eyes reflecting the weight of unspoken fears. As Marcus and the others settled around the heavy wooden table, the air thickened with anticipation, a fragile silence that begged to be broken. Brother Lucilla began, her voice soft but resolute. I must speak plainly. The decay we witness without is but a mirror to the rot within our hearts. I fear we have lost our way, forsaken the virtues that once made Rome great. Mercy, honor, faith, these are not mere relics of the past, but the pillars upon which our future must stand. Her words hung in the air, fragile as a whispered prayer, but they struck a chord deep within the gathering. Marcus's sharp eyes met hers across the table, a flicker of sadness passing through their depths. He nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in her message, yet bound by the heavy chains of political reality. Livia's dark eyes narrowed, a shadow of impatience crossing her composed face. Mercy, she said quietly, is a luxury we can ill afford. The world has changed, Lucilla. Our enemies grow bolder, and our allies fewer. Pragmatism must guide us now, lest we be crushed beneath the weight of our own idealism. The room seemed to grow colder with her words, the flicker of flame from the hearth casting sharp angles across her austere beauty. Lucilla's gaze faltered for a moment, hurt and defiance warring within her. Gaius, unable to contain the storm within, rose abruptly, his youthful energy crackling like a live wire. Pragmatism, he challenged, voice rising with restless urgency. Pragmatism is the surrender of our birthright. The empire crumbles because we cling to a failing past. We must embrace change, forge new alliances, even with those Rome once called barbarians, if we are to survive. His words echoed through the chamber, sharp and uncompromising. Marcus's jaw tightened, torn between the steadfast loyalty he owed to tradition and the undeniable truth in his son's fervor. "Gaius," Marcus said measuredly, "your passion is undeniable, but haste breeds ruin. We must tread carefully, lest we lose not only our honor but our very souls." Lucilla stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "And what of the soul of Rome? If we abandon our principles, what remains but ashes and shadows? Is survival worth the price of betrayal?" No answer came. Silence fell like a shroud, heavier than the night itself. Outside, the city murmured with distant unrest, the clang of distant armor, the muted cries of the desperate, the restless stirrings of a dying world. Within the walls of the Valerius home, however, a more intimate battle raged, one of ideals, of hope, and of fractured loyalty. Marcus's gaze drifted to the window, where the last rays of daylight surrendered to the encroaching dusk. The ruined skyline of Rome, broken columns and toppled statues etched against the darkening sky, seemed to mock their deliberations. Yet within him stirred a reluctant hope that even amid decay, something enduring might yet be saved. "We stand at a crossroads," he said quietly, turning back to his family. "Each path bears its dangers, but whatever we choose, we must choose together. For if the Valerius family falls divided, the empire's fall will be all but assured." Lucilla's eyes glistened with unshed tears, yet she nodded, understanding the heavy burden they all bore. Livia's expression softened, if only slightly, and even Gaius paused, the restless fire within tempered by the weight of responsibility. The debate lingered late into the night, words weaving between hope and despair, loyalty and betrayal, tradition and change. Outside, the city's cries grew louder, a grim reminder that Rome's twilight was fast approaching. As the household finally dispersed, the chamber was left empty save for the flickering lamp, its flame wavering but unextinguished, a fragile symbol of resilience amid relentless decay. And in that fragile light, the silent descent of a family torn between worlds echoed louder than any voice. A call to remember what had been lost, and a question of what must yet be sacrificed. The night deepened, but the struggle within the Valerius home was far from over. The empire outside may be crumbling, but the true battle lay in the hearts of those who would inherit its ashes. The Senate chamber was thick with the heat of torches and the murmurs of restless men. Cassius Drusus stood at its center, his imposing figure casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow the flickering light. The scar that slashed across his left cheek gave him a menacing aspect, but it was his cold, unwavering gaze that held the room in thrall. His voice, sharp and deliberate, cut through the disquiet like a blade. "Rome is no longer the empire of our ancestors," he declared, "but a crucible where the strong must forge new order from the ashes of the old." Around him, senators shifted uneasily. Some nodded in grim agreement. Others, those clinging to ancient ideals, exchanged wary glances. Yet none dared openly oppose Cassius now. His recent alliance with barbarian leaders had given him a power base beyond the Senate's walls of force that could no longer be ignored. His words carried the weight of inevitability, and the chamber grew silent save for the crackling of torches. Marcus Valerius sat near the back, the familiar surroundings of the Senate feeling suddenly alien. He was a man of tradition, steeped in the rhetoric and customs of a Rome he believed worth preserving. But tonight, His eloquence seemed a fragile shield against the tide of change that Cassius represented. His hands rested on the marble table, fingers tapping a quiet rhythm as he weighed the shifting currents. Outside, the city groaned under the weight of decay. The distant clang of metal and the low roar of unrest seeped through the thick stone walls, reminders of a world unraveling. Marcus's gaze drifted to the small window behind him, where twilight bled into the darkening sky. The empire was slipping through his fingers like sand, and his heart ached with the recognition of his diminishing role. Later, in the quiet of their ancestral home, Livia Valeria watched her husband from across the room. The flicker of torchlight danced across her composed face, her sharp eyes reflecting both resolve and concern. She had long urged Marcus to embrace pragmatism, to temper idealism with the harsh realities of their time. Now, as Cassius's shadow stretched across Rome, her counsel grew more urgent. Gaius, their son, leaned against a column, his youthful energy barely contained. His restless gaze met Livia's, an unspoken alliance forming between them. Father clings to a past that no longer exists, Gaius whispered, voice low but fervent. We must seize the future, whatever it demands. Livia nodded, her expression unreadable. The tides of power are shifting, she said softly. Survival may require sacrifices none of us are ready to make. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock. Marcus entered the atrium, his tall frame casting a long shadow. His eyes, though tired, held the steadfastness that had earned him respect for decades. We cannot afford division, he said quietly, yet we must not lose ourselves in the storm. The family stood together, a fragile unity amid gathering darkness. The following days in the Senate saw Cassius leveraging his newfound strength mercilessly. Senators loyal to him maneuvered with precision, sidelining those who opposed the emerging order. Flavius, a polished and calculating figure, confronted Marcus in the marble corridors, their exchange terse and charged. You cling to ghosts, Valerius, Flavius said, voice low but cutting. Cassius brings strength and vision. Your resistance is futile. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Strength without honor is ruin, he replied, though the conviction in his voice wavered beneath the weight of reality. As the political tide swept forward, Marcus found himself increasingly isolated. The Senate, once a bastion of measured discourse, became a battlefield where old loyalties dissolved and new alliances formed with alarming speed. The spectre of barbarian forces allied with Cassius loomed large, unsettling even the most hardened senators. At night, Marcus retreated to his study, a sanctuary where memories of a proud Rome mingled with the stark present. He traced the outlines of faded frescoes on the walls, their colors dulled by time, much like the empire he served. The distant sounds of unrest, a clash of arms, the cries of the desperate reached his ears, a grim chorus that underscored his solitude. He thought of Lucilla's gentle admonitions, of Livia's steely pragmatism, and Gaius's fiery impatience. The family was fracturing under the pressure, each member pulled by different currents of loyalty and survival. Marcus's heart ached with the knowledge that the path forward was no longer clear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Livia approached him quietly. We must bend or break, she said, her voice steady but heavy. Cassius's tide will not be stemmed by honor alone. Marcus looked into her eyes, searching for the resolve he once possessed. And what of our legacy? He whispered. What becomes of the Rome we vowed to uphold? Livia's gaze hardened. Legacy is not merely what we inherit, but what we do to survive. The words hung between them, a bitter truth neither wished to accept. As the chapter closed, The Senate's chamber stood empty and dark, torches extinguished. The echoes of Cassius's rise lingered in the stone walls, a portent of the irrevocable change sweeping through Rome. Marcus, caught between the tides of power and the bonds of loyalty, faced a choice that would define not only his fate but that of the empire itself. The question remained, could tradition survive the storm, or was it destined to be swept away with the ashes of empire? The answer lay in the shadows yet to come. The atrium of the Valerius household was cloaked in the muted glow of oil lamps, their flickering flames casting elongated shadows across the marble floor and the worn frescoes that lined the walls. Marcus Valerius stood tall and rigid, the weight of his senatorial robes heavy on his frame, his sharp eyes narrowed as they fixed upon his son, Gaius. The younger man's posture was taut with restless energy, his youthful face flushed with passion and frustration. Between them, the air was thick with unspoken history and a growing chasm of ideas that threatened to rend their family apart. "Father," Gaius began, his voice low but firm, "the world we knew is gone. Rome is no longer the unassailable power it once was. We must adapt or perish. Aligning with these new forces, these barbarians, is not betrayal. It is survival." Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. Survival by sacrificing our honor is no survival at all. The legacy of Rome, the traditions that have built this empire, cannot be discarded for expediency. They are who we are. Gaius's eyes flashed with impatience. And yet, those traditions have failed us. They have blinded us to the threats at our gates and the shifting tides within the Senate. If we cling to the past, we doom ourselves and our family to oblivion. Their voices rose, echoing off the marble columns, the tension palpable. Livia Valeria, standing near a tall window, her sharp dark eyes shadowed with concern, watched silently. She could see the stubborn pride in Marcus, the fiery ambition in Gaius, and the growing danger that their discord posed not only to their family, but to the fragile threads of power they still held. Enough. Livia's voice was calm, but carried an edge that commanded attention. Both men turned toward her, a momentary ceasefire in their verbal duel. "We are at a crossroads. The old ways have brought us to this precipice, but the new ways are fraught with peril. We must find a path that ensures the Valerius name endures." Marcus's gaze softened briefly as he looked at his wife. "And what would you have us do, Livia? Sacrifice everything we have stood for?" She stepped forward, the lamplight catching the glint in her eyes. "I would have us be practical. I have seen the Senate's shifting allegiances and the barbarians' growing reach. We must be willing to negotiate, to make difficult choices. Our survival depends on it." Gaius nodded, a faint smile breaking through his usual intensity. "At last, some reason. Father, you must see that your rigid adherence to tradition blinds you to the future." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And you, my son, risk everything on alliances that could bring ruin upon us all." The room seemed to contract with the weight of their conflict. Outside, the city whispered of decafant sounds of distant fires, the murmur of restless crowds, the steady drip of water from cracked fountains. It was a Rome unrecognizable, a city caught between glory and ruin. Later, the family gathered in the dining room, the absence of Lucilla palpable. Her voice, always a balm to their disputes, was missing, and the space felt colder, the shadows deeper. Plates clinked softly, but conversation was sparse, each member lost in their own turmoil. Marcus stared at the flickering candlelight, memories of a Rome that once was flooding his thoughts, while Gaius's restless glances betrayed his impatience to act, in a quiet chamber, away from the eyes and ears of their kin. Gaius met with Julia. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the stone walls as they whispered urgently about plans and alliances. Julia's merchant family connections provided valuable information and resources, and her support emboldened Gaius's resolve. Their hopes were tempered by the dangers that lurked: spies, informants, and the ever-watchful eyes of Cassius, Drusus, and his faction. "This is our chance," Gaius said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we succeed, the Valerius name will rise again, not as relics of a dying empire, but as architects of a new order." Julia nodded, her eyes shining with conviction. "Then we must be bold." Back in the household, Livia's thoughts churned. She knew the family's survival depended on delicate balances and shifting loyalties. Her heart ached for Marcus, whose ideals seemed to anchor him to a sinking ship, yet she could not ignore the pragmatic path Gaius was forging. The fractures within the family mirrored those within Rome itself, an unyielding tradition clashing with ruthless change. As night deepened over the city, the Valerius family stood at a precipice. The choices they made now would echo through the ruins of Rome and into whatever future awaited beyond its ashes. The rift between father and son was no longer just ideological. It was personal, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their legacy. Marcus paced the length of his study, the weight of his ancestors pressing upon him. He wondered if honor alone could shield them from the storm gathering beyond the city's walls. Could he find the strength to bridge the divide, or would stubborn pride doom them all? The answers remained elusive as the first tendrils of dawn touched the horizon, promising another day fraught with peril and impossible choices. The Valerius family's fate tanned, perhaps that of Rome itself, hung in the balance, fragile and uncertain. The Senate chamber buzzed with an uneasy tension that morning, the heavy marble walls reverberating faintly with whispers and shifting footsteps. Marcus Valerius entered with measured dignity, his tall frame casting a shadow beneath the towering columns. His eyes, sharp and steady despite the silver threading through his dark hair, scanned the familiar chamber with a weight that had grown heavier over the months. The decay of Rome's grandeur was mirrored not only in the crumbling city, but in the fracturing alliances that surrounded him. Today, the fragile web of loyalty he had hoped to maintain would begin to unravel. As Marcus took his seat, murmurs rippled through the Senate. Senators exchanged wary glances, their voices hushed yet charged with underlying hostility. The air was thick with suspicion, each faction poised to strike. At the center of the storm stood Cassius Drusus, whose rugged visage and cold, scarred eyes betrayed a ruthless ambition. Beside him, Senator Flavius, a sharp-featured man with calculating eyes, waited patiently, the architect of the day's impending betrayal. The presiding officer called the session to order, but before the formalities could begin, Flavius rose, a calculated calm in his posture that belied the venom in his voice. "Fellow senators," he began, his tone cutting through the chamber like a sharpened blade, "it has come to light that Marcus Valerius, once esteemed among us, has engaged in acts of treachery against the very empire he claims to serve." A gasp swept through the room, disbelief flickering across many faces. Marcus's own heart pounded, the accusation striking like a blow he had dreaded but not anticipated so openly. His eyes met Flavius's, searching for a shred of truth amidst the venom, but found only cold calculation. "Evidence," Flavius continued, gesturing to a folded parchment, "has been uncovered showing correspondence with enemies of Rome, communications that threaten our security and the stability of the Senate." Marcus felt the chamber tilt as whispers erupted into murmurs of outrage and shock. He opened his mouth to protest, to speak of the lies and manipulation that had ensnared him, but the weight of the moment stilled his tongue. Around him, he detected the shifting allegiances. The wary glances that once held promise of support now turned away. From the sidelines, Cassius Drusus watched with a grim satisfaction, his plan unfolding exactly as intended. The betrayal was not merely political, it was personal. Marcus had been a bulwark of tradition, a symbol of an era slipping into shadow. To remove him was to hasten the empire's transformation, to clear the path for Cassius's vision of power. Senators loyal to Cassius moved swiftly. Guards entered the chamber, their armor gleaming under the pale light filtering through the high windows. With a curt command, they seized Marcus by the arms, the cold iron of shackles clicking round his wrists. The clang echoed ominously, a death knell for his standing and influence. The crowd parted as Marcus was led away, his gaze lingering on the faces of those he once called allies. Among them, Livia Valaria stood quietly in the gallery, her sharp dark eyes alight with a fierce resolve. Though her face betrayed no hint of panic, beneath the composed exterior burned a determination to shield her family from the ruin descending upon them. Back at their ancestral home, the news of Marcus's arrest spread swiftly. Gaius Valerius paced the dimly lit atrium, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows across his restless features. His youthful face was set with anger and urgency, the clash of ideals with his father now eclipsed by the necessity of survival. "This cannot stand," he muttered, clenching his fists. "We will not fall quietly into oblivion." Livia entered silently, her presence grounding yet charged with unspoken plans. "We must be prudent," she said softly, "but we will fight. This family will endure, no matter the cost." Lucilla, delicate and gentle, lingered nearby, her calm demeanor masking the ache of betrayal that cut deep into the family's core. "Honor is tested in darkness," she whispered, "but mercy and faith must not be abandoned." Amidst the turmoil, Marcus found himself confined within cold stone walls, his mind a tempest of reflection and regret. The empire he had dedicated his life to was crumbling, and his rigid adherence to tradition had left him vulnerable to ruthless forces. Yet even in chains, his eloquence remained unbroken, his spirit quietly defiant. Outside, the city's decay pressed in like a gathering storm. The Valerius family, fractured but unbowed, faced the daunting question: how to navigate a world where loyalty was a perilous gamble and survival demanded sacrifices that cut to the soul. The chapter closed on a note of grim uncertainty. The betrayal had shattered their world, yet from the ashes, the faint embers of resolve glimmered. The struggle for Rome's legacy and the Valerius name was only beginning, and the cost of survival would be paid in blood and broken bonds. As Marcus was led away, his final glance toward the Senate chamber bore the weight of a man who understood that the empire's twilight was not merely an end, but the crucible in which new destinies would be forged. The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved: could honor endure when the very foundations of power were stained with betrayal? The answer would shape not only the fate of one family, but the very soul of a dying empire. The heavy iron door clanged shut behind Marcus Valerius, the echo reverberating down the cold stone corridor of the prison beneath the Senate house. The chill of the damp cell seeped through his thin tunic, and the faint flicker of a distant torch was the only light that dared to penetrate the darkness. Marcus sank onto the rough bench, his eyes adjusting to the shadows. Around him, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the cracked ceiling. He breathed deeply, the stale air filling his lungs as memories flooded his mind. The grandeur of the Senate, the vibrant pulse of Rome's political heart, now felt like a distant dream. The betrayal that had led to his downfall gnawed at him relentlessly. How had it come to this? The empire, once invincible, now crumbled beneath the weight of greed, ambition, and decay. And he, a loyal guardian of its traditions, was reduced to a prisoner in its dying days. Marcus's thoughts wandered to his family, their faces etched in his memory with a mixture of pride and pain. Livia, ever the pragmatic force behind his public composure, would be fighting battles of her own, weaving through the treacherous currents of Senate politics to shield their name. His son, Gaius, fiery and impulsive, was no doubt maneuvering in shadows of a different kind, grasping for a future beyond the old order. The cell's silence was pierced by the heavy footsteps of Tiberius. The loyal military officer approached, his battle-worn face softened by concern. Marcus looked up, offering a faint nod. "Master Valerius," Tiberius began, lowering his voice, "the family is holding strong. Livia's influence grows among the senators still loyal to us, and Gaius moves swiftly with his allies. But the storm gathers, and the walls close in." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Rome's decay is not just in stone and senate halls, Tiberius. It festers in the hearts of men. I fear the price we pay may be more than honor can bear." Outside the prison, in the shadowed corridors of power, Livia Valeria convened with a small circle of trusted senators. The air was thick with the scent of burning oil and whispered secrets. Her sharp eyes scanned the faces before her, calculating, commanding. Cassius Drusus tightens his grip, she murmured, but cracks appear. Ambition blinds even the most ruthless. We must exploit these fractures before it is too late. Her words wove a web of promises and veiled threats, a delicate dance of power that demanded both courage and cold calculation. Every alliance brokered was a gamble, every whispered word a potential dagger in the back. Yet Livia bore the weight with quiet strength, for the survival of the Valerius name depended on her resolve. In a dimly lit chamber elsewhere, Gaius Valerius leaned over a cluttered table. Maps and letters spread like battlefield plans. Julia, his childhood confidant, stood beside him, her eyes alight with fierce determination. "The barbarians are restless," Gaius said, tracing his finger along a borderline. "If we can secure their loyalty, even temporarily, it may buy us the leverage we need. But it is a dangerous path, one of betrayal and fire." Julia nodded, her voice steady. "Better to forge an uncertain future than perish clinging to a doomed past." Their whispered conspiracies carried the restless energy of youth, the desperate hope of those unwilling to surrender to fate. Yet beneath the ambition lay the fragile threads of family loyalty, strained and stretched thin by the tides of change. Back in his cell, Marcus closed his eyes, the muffled sounds of the city faint beyond the prison walls. The empire's twilight was upon them, all a time of endings and uncertain beginnings. His heart ached with the knowledge that survival would demand sacrifices that no man could face without scars. The clash of footsteps and the distant murmur of voices reminded him that the world outside did not pause for his despair. The Valerius family, fractured but unbroken, fought on amid the ashes of their legacy. As night deepened, Marcus's thoughts crystallized into a reluctant resolve. The chains that bound him were physical, but his mind still roamed free. The future awaited, dark and uncertain, and he would face it however it came, whether as a broken sentinel of a fallen empire or the reluctant witness to its rebirth. Outside, Livia and Gaius moved through the labyrinth of power and peril, their fates intertwined with the dying heartbeat of Rome itself. The consequences of their choices would echo far beyond the prison walls, shaping the destiny of a world on the brink of transformation. And in that moment, amid chains and consequences, the Valerius family stood at the crossroads of history, caught between honor and survival, tradition and change. The shadows of the merchant's warehouse stretched long across the uneven stone floor, an uncertain sanctuary for the conspirators gathered within. Gaius Valerius stood over the rough-hewn table, his fingers tracing the worn edges of a map that depicted the shifting boundaries of Rome's faltering dominion. Beside him, Julia leaned in, her voice low and urgent, weaving plans that could save their family or doom them to ruin. "The barbarians are wary, but desperate," Julia whispered, eyes scanning the scattered parchments. "Their hunger for land is matched only by their distrust of Roman deceit. We must offer more than empty promises." Gaius nodded, his restless energy barely contained. "I will meet with their leaders tonight. This alliance is our last chance. If Rome falls, so do we all." Outside, the city murmured with the restless stirrings of decay. Distant voices, the clang of metal, and the faint scent of smoke from forgotten hearths mingled in the cool evening air. Within the warehouse, the air was thick with anticipation and the weight of impending choices. As night deepened, Gaius slipped quietly through the winding alleys beyond the city walls, the moonless sky cloaking his approach. He arrived at a clearing where a flickering fire burned, the flames casting dancing shadows upon the faces of the barbarian chieftains gathered in solemn council. Their eyes, sharp and wary, reflected the firelight as they regarded him with a mixture of suspicion and guarded hope. "You come with words, Roman," one chieftain said, his voice gravelly yet commanding. "But words have broken before. Why should we trust the son of the empire that abandoned us?" Gaius met the gaze steadily. "Because the empire I serve is dying, and I seek not to uphold its decay but to build something new. Together, we can forge a future where our families survive." The negotiations stretched into the night, fraught with tension and punctuated by moments of fragile understanding. Gaius spoke not only as a son of Rome, but as a man compelled by the instinct to survive beyond rigid tradition. Back in the city, Julia moved with quiet urgency, weaving through the labyrinthine streets to deliver news of spies and informants closing in on their plans. Her eyes, bright with resolve, reflected the danger that shadowed every step. When she found Gaius again, their whispers were laced with both fear and determination. "They know more than we hoped," she said. "We must act swiftly, or all will be lost." At dawn, as the first pale light crept over the horizon, Gaius stood alone on a ruined balcony overlooking the city he once loved with unyielding devotion. The chill wind tugged at his cloak, carrying with it the scent of ashes and uncertainty. His gaze stretched across the fractured skyline, temples crumbling, forums deserted, and the faint glow of fires still burning in distant quarters. Here, amidst the ruins of empire, a new order was poised to rise. The choices made in shadows and whispers would echo through the coming days, shaping the fate of the Valerius family and the very soul of Rome. Gaius allowed himself a moment of reflection, the turmoil inside him a mirror of the world around. The alliance forged tonight was a gamble weighted with peril, but in a time when survival demanded sacrifice, it was a risk he was willing to bear. "For family," he murmured, eyes narrowing against the cold. "For the future." The city held its breath, caught between the dying embers of the past and the uncertain dawn of what was to come. And so, as the city stirred awake in uneasy silence, the wheels of fate turned inexorably onward, setting the stage for a reckoning unlike any before. The fragile threads of loyalty, power, and survival intertwined, poised to unravel or bind anew in the ashes of empire. With the dawn, the game had changed, and there was no turning back. The heavy wooden doors of the Valerius ancestral home creaked shut behind Lucilla as she entered the atrium, her footsteps echoing faintly against the cold marble. The flickering glow of oil lanterns cast wavering shadows, the quiet crackle of flames underscoring the profound stillness that had settled over the household. Her eyes found Livia across the room, who stood composed yet distant, her sharp dark eyes reflecting a steely resolve that Lucilla could no longer abide. "Livia," Lucilla began, her voice trembling yet resolute, "how far will you go to protect this family? At what cost do we sacrifice our honor?" Livia turned slowly, her gaze unwavering. "The world we knew is gone, Lucilla. Survival demands sacrifice. If we cling to old virtues while Rome burns, we perish with it." The words hung between them like smoke, intangible yet suffocating. Lucilla's delicate features tightened with a mixture of frustration and sorrow. "But is it right to barter our souls for safety, to manipulate, deceive, even betray? These are not the ways of our ancestors." Livia's lips pressed into a thin line. "And yet here we stand still standing, because I chose the path others feared to tread. You may see it as betrayal. I see it as necessary pragmatism." The tension in the room was palpable, the faint scent of burning oil mingling with the weight of unsaid words. Lucilla's eyes glistened with unshed tears, the moral compass she clung to slipping further from reach. Meanwhile, across the house in his study, Marcus sat alone. The last light of day faded through the tall windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the ornate marble floors. His hands were clasped tightly together on his lap, knuckles white, as his mind wrestled with the unfolding betrayals, both political and personal, that threatened to unravel all he held dear. He thought of Livia's cold pragmatism, necessary yet alien to his deeply ingrained sense of honor. He thought of Gaius, his son, whose restless ambition and rebellious spirit had driven wedges between father and son. And he thought, most painfully, of Lucilla's quiet despair, a mirror of the fading values he had spent a lifetime defending. A soft knock interrupted his reverie. He looked up to see Gaius standing in the doorway, youthful energy bristling in his stance. The fading light caught the intensity in his eyes, restless and challenging. "Father," Gaius said sharply, stepping inside without invitation, "your loyalty to Rome's old ways will be our undoing. The empire dies if we do not change with it." Marcus met his son's gaze, the weight of generations between them. "Change, yes, but not at the cost of what defines us. There must be a line, Gaius. Lines are drawn by the victorious, not by the vanquished," Gaius retorted, voice rising. "We cannot survive clinging to ghosts." The argument swelled between them, voices low but fierce, until the tension spilled out into the family garden. The air was cool, the sounds of the restless city faint beneath their heated words. Neither yielding, they embodied the fracture tearing through the Valerius name. Later, the family gathered in the dining chamber. The table was set with care, but the usual warmth was absent. Candlelight flickered over strained faces, illuminating the silent accusations and unspoken fears that clouded the room. Conversations faltered, glances were avoided. The bonds that had once held them tightly now felt fragile, stretched thin by conflict and doubt. Marcus, seated at the head, observed his family with a heavy heart. The cost of their survival was no longer just the empire's decline, but the erosion of their unity and shared purpose. As the meal ended in uneasy silence, Marcus allowed himself a final thought. In a world unraveling, could loyalty endure? Could love survive the corrosive touch of necessity? The answers remained as uncertain as the twilight settling over Rome itself. The family's fractures deepened, but beneath the tension lingered a reluctant hope that from these ashes, some new form of resilience might yet arise. Yet the question remained, at what price? And as the night closed in, the Valerius household stood divided, each member grappling with the shadows of their choices and the uncertain dawn to come. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, pale and uncertain, as if hesitant to illuminate the fractured city below. From his vantage point atop a rugged hill outside Rome, Gaius Valerius gazed down upon a sprawling camp that spread like a dark stain across the land. Flickering campfires cast dancing shadows against the silhouettes of warriors preparing for the coming storm. The banners of various barbarian tribes fluttered in the cold morning breeze, their colors clashing with the ochre and green of the dying fields. The air was thick with anticipation, the low murmur of voices and the clatter of armor a grim hymn to the gathering war. Gaius's heart thudded unevenly in his chest. This was the future he had chosen, a dangerous gambit to secure the Valerius family's survival amid Rome's collapse. Behind him, the distant city remained shrouded in mist and decay, its once proud marble facades now cracked and worn, the streets echoing with the restless footsteps of uncertain citizens. Within the Senate's marble halls, Marcus Valerius sat in quiet contemplation, his fingers tapping lightly on the carved wooden armrest of his chair. Though the chamber was filled with the murmurs of senators and the rustle of heavy robes, his mind was fixed on the horizon, on the storm gathering beyond the borders that threatened to engulf all they had built. Beside him, Livia Valeria regarded him with a steady gaze, her sharp dark eyes reflecting the cold pragmatism that had become their shield. "The barbarians grow bold," she said softly, voice low but firm. "Gaius's alliance has changed everything. We must prepare not just with words, but with steel and strategy." Marcus nodded slowly, the weight of his legacy pressing down upon him. "The empire we knew is gone. What remains is survival, and the cost may be more than I am willing to pay." Outside the city walls, Praetor Maximus rode among the ranks of assembled legionaries, his imposing figure clad in armor dulled by dust and battle scars. His face was a map of hardship and resolve, eyes narrowed against the rising sun's glare as he surveyed the disciplined formations that stretched like a living wall across the plain. The legions were battle-weary but unbroken, their loyalty to Rome a fragile thread amid the chaos. Maximus's voice was low and commanding as he addressed his officers. "The barbarians will test us. We must hold firm. Our duty is to Rome, to its people, to the legacy we defend, no matter the cost." In a tent nearby, heavy with the scent of smoke and leather, Gaius and Julia leaned over a rough-hewn table scattered with maps and hastily scrawled notes. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across their faces, highlighting the intensity of their whispered conversation. "The barbarians trust me," Gaius said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but their patience is thin. We must act before the Senate's divisions tear us apart." Julia's eyes glimmered with both fear and fierce determination. "If this alliance breaks, all will be lost. The Valerius name, our future, everything." The tension in the tent was palpable, the weight of impending battle and uncertain loyalties pressing in like the suffocating heat of summer. Outside, the distant rumble of approaching legions echoed through the valley. The storm on the horizon no longer a metaphor but an imminent reality. Meanwhile, in the heart of Rome, the Valerius household stirred with unease. Lucilla's delicate features were drawn with worry as she moved silently through the dim corridors, her footsteps soft against the cold stone. She paused before a small altar, fingers trembling as she traced the faded symbols of forgotten gods. Prayer was a fragile solace in a world unraveling at its seams. At the same time, Tiberius, the steadfast military officer and loyal friend to Marcus, prepared to carry out the orders that the worsening situation demanded. His stocky frame and battle-worn visage concealed a mind sharp and unwavering in loyalty. He understood the precarious balance between military might and political intrigue, and the thin line on which Rome's fate now balanced. As the day progressed, the city braced itself. Rumors of the barbarian encroachment swirled through the crowded forums and darkened alleys, whispers of war and betrayal mingling with the scent of burning wood and the ever-present dust of decay. Marcus met with fellow senators, their faces etched with worry and resolve. Cassius Drusus's shadow loomed larger with each passing hour, his ruthless ambition threatening to engulf what little stability remained. Gaius's secret dealings had shifted the tides. The barbarians were no longer simply external threats. They were part of the intricate web of alliances and enmities that defined this twilight of empire. Each decision carried a price, and each alliance risked unraveling the fragile fabric holding the Valerius family and Rome itself together. As night fell, the city's lights flickered uncertainly against the encroaching darkness. Marcus stood on the balcony of the family's ancestral home, gazing out at the sprawling metropolis that once ruled the world. The wind whispered through the broken columns and shattered statues, carrying with it the scent of ash and loss. He clenched his jaw, the bitter taste of inevitability heavy on his tongue. "The storm is coming," he murmured to himself, "and we must decide where we stand before it breaks." The heavy wooden door groaned open, its iron hinges groaning like the echoes of a forgotten empire. Marcus Valerius emerged from the shadows of his cell, his wrists still raw from the unforgiving iron shackles that had bound him for weeks. The chill of the prison seeped into his bones, but it was the weight of his thoughts that bore down most heavily. Silence wrapped around him like a suffocating cloak, broken only by the distant clang of metal and the low murmur of voices beyond the stone walls. Tiberius stood waiting, his stern expression softened by a flicker of relief. "The praetor has decreed your release, Senator," he said quietly, his voice a steady anchor amid the storm of uncertainty. "But under strict conditions." Marcus nodded, the pride in his posture tempered by the knowledge of what that release truly meant. Freedom, yes, but shackled by the new order, a Rome ruled not by the traditions he had sworn to uphold, but by the ruthless pragmatism of men like Cassius Drusus. A bitter irony settled in his chest. As they stepped into the cold morning air, Marcus's eyes scanned the city. Rome was a different place now. The grandeur of marble and gold replaced by crumbling stone, the air thick with dust and despair. Citizens moved like ghosts through the streets, their faces etched with fear and resignation. The once proud heart of the empire beat faintly, struggling against the encroaching darkness. The journey back to the family villa was marked by a silence heavy with unspoken fears. Livia waited at the threshold, her sharp eyes meeting Marcus's with a guarded intensity. There was no warmth in her greeting, only the pragmatic resolve that had become her armor in these turbulent times. "You are free," she said, her voice steady but brittle, but not unbound. "Your enemies watch closely." Gaius stood nearby, his youthful energy subdued but not extinguished. His gaze flickered between father and mother, a storm of conflicting loyalties raging within him. He had orchestrated much behind the scenes to secure Marcus's release, yet the price was steep. The family's survival now hinged on alliances Marcus found impossible to condone. Lucilla appeared quietly, her delicate features drawn with concern. Brother, she whispered, the gods watch us from afar, silent and distant. We must find our own path in this darkness. Marcus allowed himself a moment to absorb the weight of their words. The family he had returned to was not the one he had left, fractured, weary, and forced to navigate a treacherous new world. Inside the ancestral home, shadows danced on the walls, flickering with the light of candles, struggling against the encroaching gloom. The atmosphere was thick with the residue of battles fought in whispered conversations and guarded glances. Livia approached Marcus, her steps measured. The Senate has changed, she said softly. We must change with it, or be swept away. He met her gaze, the conflict within him plain to see. To what cost, Livia? Our honor, our legacy. Survival, she replied firmly. That is the legacy we must leave. The words hung between them, a chasm neither could bridge easily. Marcus's rigid adherence to tradition had been his compass, but the compass now spun wildly in the shifting winds of power. Later, in the quiet solitude of his chambers, Marcus unfastened the heavy cloak that had become a symbol of his burdens. His hands trembled not with weakness, but with the enormity of the sacrifices demanded of him. The empire he had served with unwavering loyalty was no more. In its place lay a fragile new order, shaped by pragmatism and betrayal. He thought of Gaius, impetuous, passionate, and unafraid to challenge the old ways. Perhaps the sun's vision offered a glimmer of hope amid the ruins. Yet, the cost of that hope was steep, and the path uncertain. The night deepened, and with it, the shadows of doubt and resolve intertwined. Marcus Valerius, once the steadfast guardian of Rome's fading glory, now stood at a crossroads. To survive, he must embrace the very decay he had fought to resist. As dawn painted the sky with muted hues, the Valerius family gathered once more. Their faces bore the scars of loss and compromise, but their eyes held a flicker of reluctant hope. The empire's ashes smoldered around them, but from those ashes a new future might yet rise. The price of survival had been paid in full. The question remained, what legacy would they leave behind? And so, with heavy hearts and guarded spirits, they faced the uncertain dawn. Bound by blood, burdened by history, and driven by the fragile promise of resilience amid decay. The evening air hung heavy over Rome, thick with the scent of damp stone and the distant murmur of restless citizens. Within the dim confines of a secluded chamber, Gaius Valerius sat across from a towering barbarian chieftain, the flickering light of oil lamps casting long shadows over the worn tapestries that clung to the cracked walls. The room was silent, save for the low cadence of their voices, measured, cautious, yet laced with an urgency that betrayed the gravity of their discourse. Gaius's eyes burned with a restless energy, youthful yet tempered by the weight of responsibility. He leaned forward, voice low but resolute. We stand at a crossroads, chieftain. The old Rome falters, its foundations crumbling beneath us. But through alliance, there is strength and survival. The chieftain's gaze was steady, his scarred face unreadable beneath the heavy brow. You offer terms, young Valerius. What guarantees have we that your family will honor these promises? Rome's decay is no secret, and its nobility unknown for their false words. Gaius's fingers drummed lightly on the rough-hewn table, a flicker of impatience flashing through his otherwise composed demeanor. Because we have no choice. My family's future, our legacy, depends upon your support. We will offer lands and positions within the new order, a place alongside your people rather than beneath them. The chieftain nodded slowly, considering. Very well. But understand this alliance is fragile. Betrayal will be met with fire. Outside the chamber, the city's pulse beat on. Meanwhile, in the labyrinthine corridors of the Senate, Livia Valeria moved with a grace and purpose that belied the turmoil beneath her calm exterior. Cloaked in dark silk that whispered softly against the stone floors, her sharp eyes surveyed the faces of senators and courtiers alike. Each whispered exchange, each calculated glance, was a move in a game she had long mastered. Her voice was a murmur, weaving through the corridors like smoke as she exchanged words with key senators. Her persuasive tone cloaked in the guise of concern for Rome's future. The Valerius family seeks only stability amidst chaos, she assured one wary ally, her expression composed but her mind racing. Support us, and you secure your own position in the new order. Livia's subtle manipulations were as vital as Gaius's bold negotiations. Her network of influence threaded through the Senate, weaving a safety net that protected her husband's name and their family's fragile standing. Yet, beneath her steely resolve, a shadow of doubt lingered. How far could they bend before breaking? Back at the family villa, Marcus Valerius observed these developments from the quiet refuge of the atrium. The marble columns, once symbols of Roman grandeur, now bore cracks and stains, mirroring the erosion of the empire and his own ideals. His silvering hair caught the fading light as he watched his son and wife maneuver through the treacherous political landscape. A deep melancholy weighed upon him, tempered by a reluctant acceptance. The world he had once known was slipping away, replaced by an uncertain dawn where survival demanded compromise. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a soft murmur. Perhaps this is the price we pay for life beyond the ashes. Yet the path was not without opposition. Within the Senate's marble halls, Cassius Drusus confronted Gaius with a cold, menacing smile. His scarred visage was a testament to battles fought and won, his eyes glinting with ruthless ambition. "Your alliances are a gamble, young Valerius," Cassius warned, his voice low and threatening. "The old Rome's power wanes, but the cost of defiance is steep. Remember this, loyalty to the empire still commands respect and retribution." Gaius met the gaze without flinching. "The empire you cling to is dying. I choose a future forged in new fires." The tension between them crackled in the charged air, a confrontation emblematic of the larger struggle engulfing Rome itself. As night deepened, the Valerius family found themselves navigating a precarious balance between past and future, tradition and transformation. Gaius's daring negotiations opened a door to survival, while Livia's deft political maneuvers secured their place, albeit diminished in the shifting hierarchy. Marcus, watching from the sidelines, grappled with the costs of adaptation, the erosion of ideals, the fracturing of family bonds, and the uncertain legacy they would leave. The city beyond their walls moaned under the weight of decay. But within the Valerius household, a fragile flame of hope flickered, guarded fiercely against encroaching darkness. The question lingered, could they endure the price of new alliances, or would these compromises ultimately consume all they cherished? The night whispered promises and threats alike as the family prepared to step forward into a world forever changed, their fate intertwined with Rome's uncertain future. The ashes of empire settled slowly, but from their depths, new fires began to glow harsh, unyielding, and full of peril. The chamber was heavy with silence, save for the faint flicker of candlelight dancing against marble walls cracked and worn by time and neglect. Lucilla knelt beside the small altar that had once been resplendent with offerings and incense, but now bore only a few scattered petals and a solitary bronze figurine of Vesta. Her voice trembled as she whispered a prayer, the words ancient and fervent, seeking favor from gods who seemed to have abandoned the city they once protected. O mighty Jupiter, guardian of Rome, she intoned softly, hear the cries of your children in their hour of despair. Have we forsaken you, or have you forsaken us? The room seemed to hold its breath, the dim light casting wavering shadows that stretched like ghosts across the cracked stone floor. Lucilla's delicate hands clenched the worn edges of the altar cloth as tears welled in her eyes. Around her, the faded tapestries and peeling frescoes spoke of a grandeur, now slipping beyond reach, a fading glory mirrored in her own heart. Outside, the city groaned. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang unevenly, punctuated by the murmur of restless crowds and the occasional bark of a sentry's call. Rome was unraveling, thread by thread, and the old virtues that had once bound the empire were dissolving into dust. Lucilla rose slowly, her gaze lingering on the altar before she moved toward the window, drawing the heavy curtain aside to look upon the city. From the vantage of the Valerius household, the forum lay smothered in twilight's orange glow, the ruins of temples and basilicas silhouetted against a sky streaked with smoke. Fires smoldered in the distance, their smoke trailing upward in grey ribbons that blurred the fading light. Marcus stood beside her, silent and still, his sharp eyes tracing the outlines of the city he loved yet barely recognized. "It is not the Rome I knew," he said quietly, voice thick with a mixture of grief and resolve. "The pillars of our civilization crumble, and with them the honor we swore to uphold." Lucilla met his gaze, her own filled with a sadness that transcended words. "And yet," she said, "we remain. We bear witness, even as the gods turn their faces away." Marcus sighed, the weight of years settling heavily upon his broad shoulders. "I see now the price we pay for survival. Each compromise, each betrayal of our principles chips away at the foundation we built. But what choice remains? To cling to ideals as the world burns, or to bend and break so we might endure?" Livia entered the room then, her presence a quiet but firm counterbalance. Her dark eyes scanned the scene with practiced calm, the austerity of her beauty sharpening the tension that hung in the air. "We have already chosen, Marcus," she said softly. "Our survival demands it. The empire is no longer the world it once was. We must navigate these treacherous waters or be swallowed by them." Marcus turned toward his wife, his expression a mixture of respect and sorrow. "You wield pragmatism like a blade, Livia, cutting away all that is sacred. But I wonder what remains once the blood has dried." She stepped closer, voice steady. "What remains is life, our family, our legacy, not in statues or senate seats, but in flesh and blood." The room grew still once more, the conversation hanging between them like a fragile thread. Outside, the city exhaled a low, mournful breath, as if acknowledging the truth in their words. Marcus's thoughts drifted to the past, to youthful days spent in the Senate chambers, to his governorship in distant provinces, to the ideals that had once seemed unbreakable. Those days now felt like echoes from another lifetime, overshadowed by the relentless tide of change. Later, as the household retired for the evening, Lucilla found herself wandering the empty streets near the Palatine Hill. The moon cast pale light over cracked stones and broken pillars, the silence broken only by her soft footsteps. She paused before a dilapidated statue of an emperor long forgotten, its features worn and indistinct. Her fingers traced the weathered marble, seeking in the cold stone a connection to a past that was slipping away. "What have we become?" she whispered to the night, her breath visible in the chill air. A sudden gust rustled dry leaves, carrying with it the distant sound of a lute played mournfully somewhere within the city walls. Lucilla closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, a lament for a world fading into shadow. Back within the Valerius home, Marcus sat alone in his study, the weight of his reflections pressing down like the heavy curtains drawn against the night. His fingers traced the spine of an ancient tome, its pages yellowed and fragile. He thought of the sacrifices demanded by survival, of the alliances forged in shadows, of the family torn between loyalty and change. The empire's decay was not merely a matter of crumbling stone and lost battles, but a deeper erosion of spirit and purpose. Marcus wondered if the legacy they preserved was one of strength or of surrender. Could Rome rise again from its ashes, or was it destined to be remembered only in stories whispered by those who dared to hope? As dawn approached, faint light touched the horizon, casting long, uncertain shadows across the city. Marcus rose, steeling himself for the trials yet to come. The path ahead was fraught with peril and compromise, but he would walk it with the dignity and resolve that had defined his house for generations. Outside, the first birds sang softly, their voices fragile yet insistent, a reminder that even in decay, life stirs anew. The fading glory of Rome was not yet extinguished, and within the Valerius family, a reluctant hope endured. The city awaited its next chapter, and with it, the legacy of those who dared to shape its uncertain future. The morning mist lingered low over the shattered remains of Rome, casting a pale veil over the city's broken spires and crumbled arches. From his vantage upon the Palatine Hill, Marcus Valerius gazed out across the ruins, where the proud heart of the empire once beat with unyielding strength. Now, only fragments remain: marble, shattered, temples desecrated, the Forum a hollow echo of its former grandeur. Smoke still rose from distant fires, a tangible reminder of the chaos that had razed the city's core. The cold light of dawn revealed the jagged skyline, a silhouette of decay against a sky reluctantly brightening with the promise of a new day. Marcus's shoulders were heavy with the weight of years and loss. His sharp eyes, once bright with idealism, now held a quiet fatigue, tempered by a steely resolve. He was a man transformed, shaped by the relentless tides of history that had swept away the world he had known. The Valerius family, once bastions of tradition and honor, had survived the empire's collapse only by bending beneath the storm. Yet survival came at a cost: bonds broken, compromises made, and a legacy forever altered. Behind him, the ancestral home stood battered but intact, a sanctuary amid the ruin. Within its stone walls, Livia and Gaius moved with the purposeful grace of those hardened by necessity. Livia's eyes, sharp and calculating, flickered with the shadows cast by flickering candlelight. She whispered plans and alliances, weaving threads of influence through the fragile political tapestry of Rome's new order. Gaius, restless and impassioned, leaned into each strategy with a fire that both inspired and unsettled. Their voices, low and urgent, spoke of survival and adaptation, words Marcus had once resisted but now understood as the harsh truth of their age. In the twilight of the empire, even Lucilla, the gentle moral compass of the family, wandered the shattered streets with a sadness that clung to her like a shroud. Her delicate fingers traced the cracked marble of the Forum's columns, each fissure a testament to the decay of ideals she had cherished. She mourned not only the city's physical ruin, but the erosion of the virtues that had once defined Rome: honor, mercy, faith. The gods seemed silent now, their temples abandoned, their voices a distant memory. The new Senate chamber, a modest hall far removed from the opulence of the past, buzzed with uneasy energy. Old senators and new powers sat side by side, their alliances tentative and fraught with suspicion. Cassius Drusus's shadow loomed, larger reminder that ruthless ambition still thrived amid the ruins. Yet even his cold eyes reflected the uncertainty of an empire reborn in ashes. Here pragmatism wrestled with tradition, and survival demanded a delicate balance of trust and guarded wariness. Marcus listened to the murmurs of debate, the clinking of goblets, the whispered promises and veiled threats. He felt the pulse of a city struggling to breathe anew, fragile but persistent. The Valerius name no longer commanded the unquestioned respect of old Rome, but it endured, carried forward by sacrifice and compromise. Marcus understood now that clinging to the past unyieldingly was a luxury they could no longer afford. The family's future lay not in stubborn loyalty to fading ideals, but in the hard-won resilience to navigate a transformed world. Night deepened, and the city's lights flickered like dying stars. Marcus stood once more upon the balcony, the cool air heavy with the scent of ash and earth. His thoughts turned inward to the faces of his family, Livia's steely determination, Gaius's restless ambition, Lucilla's quiet sorrow. Each bore the scars of their trials. Each embodied a fragment of Rome's fractured soul. "We endure," he whispered to the night, a vow as much to himself as to the city below. Not as it was, but as it must be. The ashes of empire settled around them, but from those ashes stirred the fragile breath of life. Rome's twilight was bittersweet, marked by loss, yet tinged with a reluctant hope. The Valerius family faced an uncertain future, their legacy forever changed, their strength tested but unbroken. In the quiet resilience of their survival lay a promise that even in decay there is the possibility of renewal. As dawn broke anew, the city's silhouette softened against the light. Marcus turned from the ruined horizon, stepping back into the house where his family waited. The path ahead was fraught with peril and sacrifice, but it was theirs to walk together amidst the ashes. The story of Rome's twilight was far from over, and in its telling, the Valerius family would write a new chapter not of empire, but of endurance. The wheels of Marcus Valerius's carriage clattered unevenly against the uneven stones of the Via Appia, the familiar yet altered landscape of Rome unfurling before him like a faded tapestry. As the provincial governor returned to the heart of the empire, his gaze swept over the city's once glorious visage, now marred by neglect and unrest. The air, thick with dust and the smell of smoke from distant fires, carried whispers of discontent and decay. The great walls, which had stood for centuries as bulwarks against invasion, bore fresh cracks wide enough to catch the morning light and crumble with the slightest touch. Marcus's thoughts were heavy with the weight of his responsibilities. Each stone seemed to echo the empire's slow, inexorable decline. The once vibrant forum, the bustling nerve center of Roman life, was quieter than he remembered, its marble columns chipped and weathered. The voices of senators and citizens replaced by the distant clang of soldiers drilling and the murmurs of an anxious populace. Upon reaching the Valerius family's ancestral villa, the air inside was thick with tension. The once grand halls, adorned with frescoes depicting Rome's heroic past, now seemed suffused with a somber stillness. Livia met Marcus at the entrance, her sharp eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and guarded calculation. "Welcome home," she said softly, her voice steady but betraying the weight she carried. "Rome has changed while you were away." Gaius, their son, stood apart near the hearth, his youthful energy barely contained, his gaze, sharp and restless, flicked between his parents as if challenging them to see the world as he did, a world in flux, demanding new alliances and bold action. Lucilla, Marcus's younger sister, sat quietly near a window, her delicate hands folded in her lap. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the rising storm within the room. The family convened in the triclinium, the chamber where generations of Valerius had debated the fate of Rome. Voices rose and fell as they argued over the empire's direction. Marcus, steadfast and measured, defended the virtues of tradition and honor. "We are the guardians of Rome's legacy," he intoned, "and we must stand firm against the tides of chaos." Livia countered with a pragmatism honed by years of court intrigue. "The old ways will not save us," she argued. "Survival requires adaptation, even if it means compromise." Gaius, his youthful passion ignited, spoke boldly of forging new paths beyond Rome's dying structures. "Clinging to the past will only hasten our ruin. We must embrace change or be swept away." Lucilla's voice, gentle yet resolute, sought to mediate. "Let us not lose sight of our principles, even as the world shifts beneath our feet. Mercy and honor must guide us still." As night deepened, the family's debates wove a tapestry of conflicting loyalties and fears. Marcus found himself torn between his unwavering duty to Rome's traditions and the pragmatic calls for survival voiced by those he loved. The city outside, shrouded in shadows, and the distant echoes of unrest, seemed to mirror the turmoil within. Later, standing on the villa's balcony, Marcus gazed over the twilight-soaked city. The fading light cast long shadows over the broken statues and empty forums, monuments to a grandeur slipping beyond reach. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant cries of watchmen and the rustle of autumn leaves stirred by a cold breeze. In that moment, Marcus understood the profound truth of his return. Rome was no longer the bastion of certainty it had once been. Its heart beat unevenly, fragile yet persistent. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, demanding courage and sacrifice. Inside, Livia approached, her presence a steady anchor amid the storm. Their conversation was hushed but charged with unspoken fears and hopes. "We must be ready, Marcus," she said. "The world is changing, and so must we." He nodded slowly, the weight of his lineage pressing upon him. "For Rome, and for our family, we will endure." As the night deepened, the city's distant fires glimmered like dying embers, a stark reminder of the fragile flame they sought to protect. The struggle for Rome's soul had begun anew, and the Valerius family stood at its uncertain center. The first step had been taken, but the road ahead promised trials that would test every bond and belief.